I'm very happy to say hello to you and Inka. She organized the conference mostly with me, and some people were involved in the organization, and I want to introduce these people too. Where is Alexander Neupath? Is he here? Very in the back. He helped us a lot. Herbert Marcuse helped us a lot. Sarah Surak, Harold, Sarah Surak helped us a lot. And of course, some students here from the university with the support of the student association from the university. Without the support, this conference and the book of the conference hasn't been realized. So thank you very much, Finn and Andri. They will give a talk about the house after our short welcome. So I give the microphone to Inka. She will do the most organization information, and then I will come back to you.
Yeah, it's just funny because we talked outside and Peter said, yeah, you will start. So I will start, but that was his speech, I think. So, dear guests, keynote speakers and lecturers, dear members of the International Herbert Marcuse Society, Peter said it, with many other helpers, I had the privilege of co-organizing this conference. I know only a few of you personally, but I have been told that such a conference is a little bit like a family or class reunion, a little bit perhaps like Thanksgiving, just in October and without a turkey. So I'm very, very happy to be here and meet you all. Finally, my thanks, of course, goes to Peter Erwin, because it's his fault that I'm standing here. Like he said, I'm more responsible for the organization part, and he's more responsible for the content of this conference. This means for the next 3 days, you're very welcome to come to Peter Erwin when you want to discuss something, when you want to I think you know him, so you can discuss every time with him. And if you have some question from the organizational part, you can come to me. Since this division worked quite well, I will now say some few words about the organizational part. With your registration at our registration desk, you received a folder and a conference plan. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. And among other things, you will find a flyer on the project Weitergedenken, which PE and I currently running at the universities of Koblenz on the culture of remembrance, as well as you will find an interest or registration form for our newly founded association HMLL, Herbert Marcuse and Bleu Löwenthal in Frankfurt, to which we will invite you. So if you're interested, fill out the form and simply drop it into the mailbox at our registration desk, and we will then contact you. The conference schedule, we will update it on the internet, and with spontaneous cancellation and change, you will also find an updated version on the registration desk all the time. Perhaps the most important things, I think the most people get this information from Henrik. You will have a small white piece of paper in your folder with a personalized password on it. That's the Wi-Fi access. You can use Wi-Fi guest from ESTA for the next few days with this personal identity password. And I would also like to point out some of the most important information first. Some panels, this one too, will be filmed and photographed. As a speaker, you will probably already be aware of this, but it's also important for everyone else. You have 20 minutes for each presentation and 5 minutes for discussion in the next days. The moderators will inform you of this, but we ask you not to go over the time. All rooms are next to each other on this floor, so it should be no problem to switch between the panels. And you will find room 1, 2, 3, 4 just on the door, so there's no problem to find them. I will also remind you of the tours of the Institute for Social Research on Friday and Saturday. We'll have a few places available still, so you can sign up later at the registration desk if you want to. For your physical well-being, there will be a small snack every morning and afternoon downstairs in the cots, and of course drinks. And otherwise, we recommend the restaurants in the area, so there are so many, you will find something. every evening we look forward to welcome you at the COTS 2. Tonight, for example, there will be a chess party. And on Friday and Saturday evening from 8 o'clock, there will be a little bit music and drinks and some very good wines. So as the title of the conference, Critical Theory in Motion, here you can dance perhaps into your own multidimensionality. So we will very welcome you there. So I think I have ticked all my organizational points. Missed I something? No? So I will give it back to PE and he will do the rest of the thing.
Okay, thanks, Inka. I'm sorry that I started the conference. Yeah, we have this opening evening, the kickoff of the conference, and we have two interesting speakers here. One is Stefan Lessenich. He is the director of the Institute for Social Research right now, since 1 year, I guess. Unfortunately, he has a meeting and he will come and join us at 6 p.m. So we are a little bit postponing our schedule, but I hope it will work. So, and the second, and I'm very happy to have her here, Corinne Pelluchon. Maybe you can stand up that the people can see you right now. And I heard a talk in Koblenz and I was very impressed. And I said, okay, we have Adornos Diktum, es gibt kein Richtiges im Falschen. And Corinne Pelluchon has a little bit more hope, and maybe there is a little bit hope for in the wrong way, in the wrong society. And I think everybody from the audience hope that we get a better society and that we get a better climate right now and more protest against this confusion in the democracies. It's more than confusion. We look to America, we look to Brazil. Brazil is now a little bit better because Lula is in power. I don't know if I'm right. Where are the Brazilian friends? I hope so, that Lula makes it better. And so we are very happy for the kickoff, and all the panels, Inka said it already, will be held here on the floor, in this rooms, on this floor 1, 2, 3, 4. And we start with a keynote panel. That is a new structure of the conference. So we have keynote speaker for today, for the kickoff, and then we have keynote speaker for every panel. And then we start the panel discussions, the panel lectures. So it's just an experiment. We don't know if it works, but I hope it works. Then the panel speaker give a little bit of input, and then we will see if we have a good discussion with the different lectures. So thank you very much that you are here. We have 100 people registered. That is a good number of audience, of panelists, and I hope you feel very well here in Frankfurt. Like Inka said, we have the COTS. COTS, it's a very difficult expression in Germany. Normally it means throw over, but that is not the impression for that. It's COTS means Communication Center. Kommunikationszentrum, and it's just a short form of it. And a former political group will run their small winery, and you are very much invited to go there on Friday evening and Saturday, like I said, music and so on. So that is my part, and I'm very happy to give the word to one of the supporters of the Student Association. It's Finn. And I'm very happy, Finn, that you will say something about this building, because it has a very, very interesting history. So, Finn, it's your part. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much for the short introduction, and also a big welcome from us, the Student Association of the Goethe University in Frankfurt. As some of you may already know, and as Peter Erwin Jansen already said, the Student House we are right now in has hosted a lot of political and theoretical conferences and happenings since its opening in 1953. Max Horkheimer, the rector of the Goethe University of Frankfurt at the beginning of the century, dedicated the building at that time to students for democratic self-education. It is thus a counterpoint to the student life before 1945, which was largely dominated, of course, by right-wing and national student councils. And in the following decades, initiatives from this house had an impact on the city of Frankfurt, but also as well on the Republic of Germany. For example, there was the Discus magazine, which was one of the most progressive journals in this country since the 1950s. Or there was another example, the Neue Bühne, which developed important new impulses as an avant-garde theater in this house, and also another project, which was this Studio Galerie, another avant-garde art show, which did a lot of happenings in this house. Already in the 1960s, people here were also dealing with German guilt in the post-Nazi society. And there was of course, the student movement of 1968 with its protest against, for example, the emergency laws, as well as the beginning of the second women's movement, which also has its roots in this building. And in the 1970s and 80s, a lot of other social movements, such as the environmental movement, met here. And in the 2000s, the house was a nationwide hub of the successful protest against tuition fees. And a lot more recent, in 2010, to name another example, the house was a center of the so-called Blockupy protest. So throughout the time, the house was not only a rallying point for political movements, but served also much for political and theoretical thought and reflection. More than in any other place, students, especially in the socialist student movement, SDS, during '68 in Frankfurt, oriented themselves to the text of critical theory. Aware of the fact that political movements without theoretical reflection tend to degenerate into an end in themselves or even into ideology, we still want to maintain this orientation to critical theory today. Above all, the classical critical theory of the Frankfurt School is increasingly being pushed out of university curricula. Those are a few reasons to why we, as the student representatives, support this conference and other projects that work on critical theory today. To this end, we have worked together with Peter Erwin Jansen and Inka Engel over the past year on a book in which some previously unpublished texts by Marcuse and Leo Löwenthal are printed, and they can be purchased at this conference here. The volume is intended to motivate people to engage with the work of the two theorists, and if I have another minute, I can say some words about the publication. Otherwise, okay. Thank you. So the first text is in the book is an essay with the title "The Containment of Social Change in Industrial Society," which Marcuse presented at Stanford in 1965 and which is published and translated here for the first time. The text, dense in content, summarizes some of the central motives of Marcuse's critique of society and discusses them sufficiently in terms of the possibilities of social change in the then current phase of capitalism. And despite some rather pessimistic thesis about the increasing difficulty of opposition and resistance in advanced industrial society, Marcuse still emphasizes possibilities of an immanent critique of capitalism in this text. Thematically following on from this question of the first essay, the text "A History of the Doctrine of Social Change," written in collaboration with Franz Neumann, deals with the role of social change in social philosophy, beginning with the Greek philosophers and extending to Hegel and Marx. And Marcuse's final contribution in this volume, entitled Anti-Semitism and American Labor, is an excerpt from the research project Anti-Semitism Among American Labor, which prepared between 1944 and 45. Like Löwenthal, Marcuse, from a Jewish family fleeing Nazi persecution, had emigrated to the United States, where he became increasingly concerned with the social causes and functions of anti-Semitism. The text published in this book presents the research project of the mentioned study, which aimed to examine anti-Semitism in US labor. In the next part of the book, there are a few texts by Löwenthal, and the first one is a letter to Marcuse from the year 1943, which not only provides information about the state of their theoretical discussion at that time, but also testifies to their close friendship. The content of their discussion seems to have been the question of which concepts and categories would be used to explain anti-Semitism in the most reasonable way. This is followed by a text that appeared in 1945 under the title Terror's Atomization of Man, and it was later published in German in the translation as Individuum und Terror. Here Löwenthal deals with the connection of the atomization of the individual and fascist terror. The central motive of the critical theory of the Frankfurt School that fascism does not arise as opposition to, but rather from modern society, already finds its way in here. In contrast, the following interview, translated into German for the first time, is from the early 1980s. Here, Löwenthal reflects on the emergence and history of critical theory and speaks openly about his opinions of current political and intellectual developments, such as post-structuralism. This writing is interesting, as I think, or we think, above all because Löwenthal, unlike other thinkers of the first generation of critical theory, was able to assess, let's say, more current developments in philosophy and sociology. The essay entitled Reden über das eigene Land, or in English, Speeches on One's Country, from 1984, is the last text in this volume. Löwenthal, who remained in the US after his emigration, sums up in this text his impressions of a longer trip to the Federal Republic of Germany. The text also testifies to his necessarily, let's say, fractured relationship with Germany and provides some insight into the biographical and theoretical convergence of his critical theory. So I hope those few remarks on the text in this volume that we present here have sparked some interest in you, and as I said, you can buy it on the book table on the registration desk. I just want to thanks Peter Erwin Jansen again for the possibility to work on this volume, and Inga Engel for the organization and all the others of this conference, and I hope you have a good stay in Frankfurt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Finn, for this overview of the book, but I hope you have not enough information now about the book. Please read it and support the conference, because all the money goes into the conference. Thank you, Finn, and thank you for the support again. Arnold Farr, the founder of the International Herbert Marcuse Society, couldn't make it today, so he will be on a panel on Saturday evening. He will come tomorrow, so we are very sorry that unfortunately he missed the plane. I will say 2 words before I give the word to where is Terry? Terry Marley, who is a board member of the Marcuse Society. 2 words about the situation of panelists, one from Tunisia, and Said Mahfoud. He is a professor in Cairo, in Tunisia, and we tried to get him here, but the German embassy denied his visa. And that has something to do with the situation right now. Here's a refugee situation we have here now in Europe. And second, and that was very unusual, scientist from Turkey, Emre Güner, he couldn't come because the German embassy in Istanbul didn't allow him to get a visa. So you see what happened right now. It's just two small examples, Northern Africa and Turkey, and they didn't get a visa to come here, and we are very disappointed about this situation in the embassy. That makes it very hard for us to get people from abroad, from Africa and, for example, from the Turkey. That's just a short comment about it. Yeah, then I'm very happy to give the word to Terry Marley, who is a representative today for the Marcuse Society, and give him a warm welcome. He's from Toronto.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. Willkommen. I just want to, yes, I heard that Arnold couldn't make it. He was going to talk before I was going to speak about a bit of the history of the Marcuse Society, and I guess I'll just fill in a little bit of that for him. Arnold and I were on a panel at York University, where he's a visiting professor, York University in Toronto, where we had the 2017 Marcuse Conference, and he's a visiting professor this year. And we were on a panel for one of their programs called the Social and Political Thought Program that's been around for almost 50 years. And it's we were on a panel about a critical theory course that's been taught continuously for more than 40 years. And Arnold was talking about a bit of the background of his founding the Marcuse Society in 2005. So that's just a little bit of his part of the story that I can fill in without appropriating it or filling in for him too much. He founded it in 2005. He was teaching in Philadelphia at the time. And he said it was just a small group at first. There was a conference at York in 2009, a few other places, 20 people, 25 people, one afternoon, a workshop kind of thing. And then Arnold met Andrew Lamis from University of Pennsylvania, who became involved, and together they became a very dynamic duo. And the conferences took place every 2 years, and the membership and the interest grew to the point where we're having a conference of this size here today. So I just wanted to send a shout out, as my students say, a shout out to both Arnold for founding the Marcuse Society in honor of that intellectual and other labor that he initiated, and to Andy Lamis for helping to do a lot of the organizational work. And as a team, they both got the Marcuse Society going, and it's today a thriving going concern, in my view, in my opinion. I'm the co-chair of the board of because it's now a nonprofit organization and it has a structure and planning and all of that kind of thing, like an association, an academic association. But as it's not just an academic association, though, and that's important to emphasize. And I think we heard two important dimensions or layers of that. I appreciated the opening remarks, for example, from Peter Irwin and from Finn, from the student representatives here, because there are all these layers of meaning and context, if you like, that they began to unfold a bit. Peter Irwin's comments about the scholars at risk were directed towards how a Marcusean lens or Marcuse and critical theory it can be connected and is connected very much to ongoing issues and concerns that are current for all of us globally. And the Marcuse Society now, in its membership, which is becoming more global as we speak, is reflected in that. And I'll talk a bit about that in a second. And I also appreciate the history that was given of this building. This is my first time here in this building, and yet I feel very at home here right away, right? For all of the reasons that you heard about in terms of the student activism, the protests, the issues that were raised, the currents and waves that have passed through this building from the 1960s until now. And so I appreciate all of us being here, and I appreciate being here with all of you at this moment, at this point in time, historically. And in closing, after I go through a little bit more of the history just for a few minutes, and some of the people, some more of the people who've been involved in developing the programs and agendas and the critical theory within the Marcuse Society. I wanted to just say something about what I take to be, or what I think is the significance of having this conference here and co-sponsored with, or having it in Frankfurt with the Institute for Social Research, right? Institute for Sozialforschung. And I know Stefan Lesenich can't be here just at the moment, but I want to say something just brief. Oh, there he is, sorry. He is here. Guten Tag. He is here, just arrived. And I wanted to say something about that kind of collaboration as well that I think is very important at this moment, historically and politically, in terms of where we're at. So it's the 100th anniversary, of course, of the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt. It's the 10th anniversary, and we're lucky these happened in the same year so that we could all be together here. The 10th anniversary, not anniversary, but the 10th meeting, the 10th conference, and they happen every 2 years, of the International Herbert Marcuse Society. And I'm really glad we can have it here in this place and celebrate it with the Institute for Social Research, whose important work is continuing under the new director, Stefan Lesenich. So as mentioned, I wanted to say a bit about that in just a minute. But I also wanted to give a sort of acknowledgement or recognition, if you like, of some of the elders, and I'm using this term quite consciously. Elders is a term that's used in Canadian, American, and Australian and other discourses about in Latin America about indigenous peoples, right? And the indigenous peoples in bands, tribes, indigenous communities, and Aboriginal communities, who sometimes hold an elected office of some sort, but often don't. And they are often the women in the band or tribe, not always the men. And the elders are kind of they embody the collective wisdom, if you like, and the history, often the oral histories of the group and the place and the land and the struggles against colonialism, imperialism, etc. Those kinds of things. And we've got our own version, I think, in the Marcuse Society of the elders of the group, which I just want to acknowledge just briefly for a minute. Douglas Kellner, for example, who's one of the leading Marcuse scholars globally and who put together the 6 or 7 volumes of the Marcuse collected works. Doug couldn't be here today, but I wanted to acknowledge his contribution, his lifelong contribution to our cause and to the Marcuse Society, both in terms of participating in the past very actively in a whole range of Marcuse-related activities and in thinking through, from his perspective as a scholar of pedagogy, a scholar of cultural studies, critical media studies, digital literacy more recently, etc., a whole range of things that Doug has really pioneered and has been an elder of the Marcuse Society from whom a lot of us take sustenance and strength. Another person who couldn't be here this year, but who occupies a similar role, I suppose, in some sense, is Andrew Feenberg. And Feenberg, of course, is well known to many of you for his studies of technology, right? Marcuse and technology. And he couldn't be here today, but he is also one of the people that the Marcuse Society has relied on, as well as Charles Reitz, who's done a lot of work on ecology and aesthetics, done a lot of translating, has translated Marcuse extensively, and it has been a very important part of the history of the Marcuse Society as well. And I'm probably leaving out somebody. I apologize if I do. But it's always the case if you have a bunch of names in your head, you don't remember them all because of that little bit of nervousness that everybody still has when you're in front of the microphone, or at least that I still do. But there are a whole range of other people. There are a whole range of other scholars who were around for many years and who've been involved in the society, as well as a new generation, a new group of scholars who are, and I can think of Sarah Surek, for example, Robert Kirsch, Eduardo Altman, Silvio Carnero, a number of other scholars from the US, Brazil, Mexico, and India now, who as well, the co-chair of the International Marcuse Society is Professor Savita Singh, who couldn't be here today as well, because of the logistics of the trip, but she is involved in something called the Creative Theory Consortium in India, and they have a series of fantastic conferences that a number of us have gone to, and that some of you might be familiar with. So there's the Marcuse Society started off as a kind of somewhat more regional thing, I suppose, in North America, but it's really grown and developed over the last 15 years to encompass colleagues in Brazil, Mexico, India, and elsewhere, and in Europe, of course, too, but in the global south as well. And I just thought I'd mention some of those. Leica Canguçu is over here, right, as well, from Brazil. And the Brazilian and other groups have really brought Marcuse to life or Marcuse studies broadly conceived to life in their own local specific historical, cultural situations and arenas, if you like. That is that's a very brief overview of some of the some of I guess the generational continuity, if you like, even though the issues have changed and there've been a lot of debates about the significance of Marcuse's work, its ongoing relevance, its history. I see this kind of work in two respects. One is as a kind of exercise in retrieval, and there was a comment that I think Finn made about the fact that critical theory studies are kind of being pushed aside to some extent within the universities. And of course, we're all familiar with debates about identity politics and the sort of currents that are pulsing through society and through societies and through academia as well. I think the exercise in retrieval, which some of the longtime Marcuse scholars like Andrew Feenberg have engaged in, going back to Marcuse's earlier work and whatnot, have been important in terms of nourishing and laying a groundwork for the continuing analysis of Marcuse's relevance today, which Peter Irwin spoke to, for example, in his remarks. And since I've got 2 minutes left, I'll just briefly say that the reason I wanted to connect a bit of that background to what's going on at this conference in this place is because we all know that academics, of course, disagree, right? That's part of our job, that's part of our training. We disagree on many things. If you think of Marcuse and his past disagreements, there were disagreements with Marcuse had with Fromm in Dissent magazine in the 1950s. There were disagreements that Marcuse had with Adorno over the student movement in 1968. There have been other disagreements that one could cite, and there's a lot of disagreement today about democracy, authoritarianism, and a lot of key issues. But I think the thing that's significant for me about being here is that in light of the current moment we are in historically, I just celebrate the fact that we can have our conference here and that the Institute for Social Research continues its important work as well. And whatever one might think of possible differences, or perhaps differences in terms of the first and second and third waves of critical theory, so to speak, and those are all valid, those are all points of discussion, and that we're all familiar with. I think at this moment historically, if we keep doing our work and the Marcuse group or folks people are interested in Marcuse, and the Institute for Social Research keeps doing its important work, I think we can work together and learn from each other in this moment, because looking at different aspects of using critical theory to look at different aspects of the current society is, I think, an important joint project. Doesn't mean we're all going to be the same. Doesn't mean that we're going to, there'll be identity or complete agreement, right, between the different currents, even within critical theory. But it's important at this point that we all recognize that the work we are doing in our own places is really important in terms of fighting back against the kinds of issues that Peter Irwin was talking about, and against authoritarianism and fascism as it raises its head again. And Marcuse, I think, is critical in that fight. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Terry, for this overview of the history of the Marcuse Society, which is only founded in 2005, and it looks for me we are older than 25 years. So thank you very much for this overview. And so the idea of the Marcuse Society is not only to take the thinking of Marcuse, but it's much more to get the tools from Marcuse's thinking, from making a critique of the actual situation in different societies. So it's not only a small way to go with Marcuse, but it's a big way to use the tools of critical theory to criticize this world, which is pretty much in danger. That is our opinion like that. I'm very happy to introduce you now Herbert Marcuse. He is a representative of the family, so we knew each other since, I don't know, 30 years. And how does it come that we make not only a Marcuse conference, that we also make a Leo Löwenthal conference? That is that we have both archives here in Frankfurt from Leo Löwenthal and from Herbert Marcuse, and I'm responsible for the Leo Löwenthal archive. Susanne Löwenthal is here in Frankfurt right now. She's a widow, 86 years old now, but she said, okay, I don't want to come just as a widow. I don't have to say anything. You can say better, you know, Leo better than I do, but it's not right. But from her, the best to the audience. And Harold will give the welcome for the Marcuse family, and Stefan Lessenich is here, and he will then take the micro and give us a welcome keynote. Thanks. Harold, it's your.
So many thanks to Peter Irwin and my previous speakers. I have the privilege of welcoming you from the Marcuse family. I'm not a Marcuse scholar in particular, but I've become very involved in the legacy of my grandfather over the years. So I'd like to sort of spin out a little story. Inka mentioned her and Peter Irwin's project Weiter Gedenken. That is how thoughts about past events, especially migration and refugees seeking asylum in other countries, get passed on from generation to generation. And now I'm the third generation. Herbert died in 1979. You can see his gravestone in Berlin. I'll be talking a little bit about the background of how that came to be. He died in 1979. My father, who was very involved in the founding of the Marcuse Society in 2005, passed away last year. And so now I find this legacy resting on my shoulders. So the rights to publications and the many translations that are still being requested and published come to me, and with Peter Irwin's great advice on how to navigate those kinds of things, I find myself increasingly involved. But I also have my own family-based legacy of Herbert Marcuse. And so I'm going to take a step back and give you the story that I would tell. So I'm also, I should say, a historian who studies the history of Germany, in particular public history in Germany, the history of commemoration of events in the German past, in particular World War II and the Holocaust, and how they are transmitted in German society through films, school books, novels, museums, commemorative anniversaries, and such like. So that's my own personal expertise. And I probably came to that through my family legacy, although it wasn't really made explicit through narratives. So the first thing I would say is Herbert, he was a grandfather for me. He was kind of a funny guy. He collected hippopotamuses. He had a nice house in Southern California, in San Diego. We would visit him from time to time, in particular in the late 60s, when he was sort of at the pinnacle of his notoriety in California. We lived, I'm from the East Coast of the US, but we lived in California at that time and visited Herbert and his wife at that time, Inge Marcuse, a few times. So he was kind of just a fun grandfather. I didn't really understand that legacy. I was 10, 11 years old. So the first time I really got involved with Herbert was when in 1998, a film, Herbert's Hippopotamus, was made by a Danish philosophy student who had come to San Diego to try to find traces of Herbert Marcuse at San Diego, at the university and in the town. And he produced this wonderful film, Herbert's Hippopotamus. He is what he named it. It will be shown tomorrow night, I think here in this room, 9:15, so you get to see it. It's a great documentary of the years in San Diego in 1968, 69, and what happened then. So to cut that short, this guy, Alexander Jutelainen, his film was screened at the university where I was teaching in 1998 in Santa Barbara, and people asked me to give an introduction, so I put together a short biography of Herbert Marcuse, and that was in the early days of the internet, and I posted this biography in the very early days of the internet when we were still dialing in with modems and you know, remember those? Some of the older ones of us will remember. So I posted that on the internet, and increasingly I got inquiries, requests for more information, and about 5 years later, I really increased the size of that webpage, put a lot of information, started gathering all the information I could find that other people had put on the web. I have an archive of some of the early web pages that people put up of quotations about him. So I really got much more involved in his work and started reading it myself in in the original, and came across a book that he had given me in 1974 when I was just learning German. I had come to study in Germany in the mid 1970s for a year abroad and ended up staying for longer. And he gifted me a German edition of his book, which I hadn't read, with a nice little inscription in it. So anyway, this is now the early 2000s, and I sort of was hearing from Marcuse scholars all over the world, and a Belgian philosophy professor said, "Hey, my students and I were sort of looking into the biographies of professors, and where is Herbert Marcuse buried? We'd like to know." And I said, "Actually, I don't know that he is buried." He died in 1979. He gave a talk here in Frankfurt at the Römerberg-Gespräche in the summer, must have been June of 1979, and then he was invited by Habermas to spend some time at the Max Planck Institute for the study of the scholarly technical world. And at that time he had a stroke which sort of made him worse, and he passed away in Starnberg in Germany. And at that time he was married a third time to Erika Scherelver, and Erika said, "You know what, I don't want Herbert to be cremated in Germany. Germany has enough Jewish ashes," was a statement that she made. So they sent him to Austria to be cremated, which is kind of bizarre because Austria was probably more National Socialist than Germany proper. At any rate, so he was cremated in Austria, and then what to do with the remains, she wanted to have them. And in Germany and Austria, you're not allowed to touch human remains. So the remains had to be sent to a funeral parlor in the United States. My father had arranged that. Long story short, they're in Connecticut, and Erika Scherelver passed away just a few years later and had never really dealt with what to do with Herbert's remains. So there's this urn of ashes at some funeral parlor in some town in Connecticut that we had looked up through connections. And so I asked my father, "This Belgian professor wants to know where Herbert's ashes are. Do you know?" And he said, "Oh gosh, this is now in the early 2000s, so it's a good 20 years later." So with a number of phone calls of all the funeral parlors in New Haven, Connecticut, we found out which one, and they still had a carton of ashes still with the old, the postal stickers of the official shipment. And so we had this urn of ashes, and the question is, okay, what do we do with them now? And in contrast to Ricky Scherelver, I thought, I study German history. I think, by now in the 2000s, Germany really is very welcoming towards its former Jewish citizens. And I think it would be appropriate for Herbert to find a final resting place in Germany. So this is now still the relatively early days of the internet in 2020. So I sort of put out an email request to scholars and asked, what should we do with Herbert's ashes? We're thinking of giving them to Berlin. My father thinks they should be scattered in his backyard. His other son thinks they should be put into the hippo pit at the San Diego Zoo, which Herbert loved hippopotamuses because they were so ridiculous. All fitting things one might do. And ultimately we came to the conclusion that if Berlin wanted his remains, we would have them interred here, or not here, but in Berlin. And indeed, Berlin offered to give him an honorary grave, and you see the gravestone, which I just visited a few weeks ago, in the Dorotheenstädtischen Friedhof cemetery in Berlin, where Brecht and Heinrich Mann and Hegel and Fichte and a number of German luminaries are also interred. So this is his gravestone. If you look very, very closely, you can see the profile of the stone is a one, as in one-dimensional man. But on the slanted surface are the words, or the word in German, weitermachen. Continue on, fight on, struggle on, persevere. There are many different translations of the literal German, which means basically continue doing. And that's sort of the theme I want to make as I tell you this little story of how one person got involved in this legacy. And what Herbert really wanted was for he didn't think he had the last word and the latest wisdom on trying to reinterpret Marx and to try to update Marxist theory with insights of Freud and so on. He wanted other people to think dialectically, to take the things that he said and apply new insights as time went on. And so ultimately we had a ceremony in 2003 in Berlin to inter his ashes. It was a lot of fun. My extended family came together for that, and Peter Irwin, by then, Herbert's papers had been given here to Frankfurt in the archive at the University Library. And Peter Irwin brought some documents from that library, including things that I did not remember myself. And one was a letter that must have been written in the early 1970s that in my local newspaper in a random small town in Connecticut, someone had written that Herbert Marcuse had advocated the burning of the books. And I, as a 14-year-old, what did I know? I wrote a response, a letter to the editor that was published in the local paper saying, no, that's absolutely not what he advocated. He thought the ivory tower was a bastion of free speech where ideas could be thought about, could be contradicted, could be developed, could be weiterentwickelt would be the German term. And that's really what we're all about. So in this little legacy that I just told you, starting in 1998 with a biography and an internet page that got bigger and bigger, actually it went back much further, and there were things within my family that sat much more deeply in my personal experience. So really to conclude, and just because the stone is so weathered and the Weitermachen is so hard to make out, when I was there, actually, after I took the picture, I took a little sand and tried to scrub off some of the moss. It's really up to us as scholars and as activists. Herbert was always one who said scholarship should always be combined with praxis. That was one of the disputes he had with Adorno, who thought theory is separate, theory is holy and golden and sacred, and it shouldn't be dirtied by activism and praxis. And Herbert disagreed. He said a scholar should be an activist and should bring their wisdom out to the people. So I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you all for picking up Herbert's legacy. As Terry Melly said, 2 years after this burial of Herbert's ashes, the International Herbert Marcuse Society was started with a very small group of scholars. That was the 50th anniversary of Herbert's probably most read book, Eros and Civilization, and it has grown over now the 10th conference, 18 years later, just a large body of scholars dealing with many, many more works. And so we have to do the Weitermachen. We have to keep the moss from growing on old thoughts. It's not theory. It's not sacred. It's something that we have to challenge, and we have to develop further, really, to deal with the problems facing our world, including especially climate change and the sort of political retrograde movements of our time, and to deal with the new technologies that are snowballing over us at this time. So again, thank you for coming. Those are my words of welcome, my little story to get you thinking, and I hope we have a very successful conference. Thank you.